I'm Joe Williams, and
I'm Sophie George.
we work at Basingstoke College of Technology. As you can see, our research project was OTLA 7 Action Research Project for for using technology. Our project aim is to use an action research approach to investigate digital learning and the effectiveness of learner-led digital activities.
We want to detail what methods of delivery will be best suited to fully engage our GCSE maths research learners. Looking at how learners engage in maths and how this affects their progression is a passion of the maths team. Development has been a significant part of our programme for a number of years.
The action research investigation will look into what works in a conventional workbook teacher-led approach, which learners would have likely experienced at school, in comparison to a digital learner-led approach. We hope to see how this impacts engagement, achievement, and progression.
As researching students, for whatever reason, maths didn't quite click at school for them. Therefore, we are investigating the effectiveness of directing their learning towards a more flipped learning model with a heavy emphasis on digital participation. We will implement this with digitally adapted resources via the Google Suite.
We've gathered and evaluated opinions through learner surveys and small group feedback sessions. Staff are asked on what they felt engaged learners. We've also looked at scores of when learners have been taught through digital means and worked independently to analyse in comparison to topics that were taught in conventional paper workbook manner.
When we have an action research week, we have one class do a digital lesson and one class do a non-digital lesson. The learners in a non-digital group still have access to laptops, phones, etc.
We plan for both of these classes to be taught simultaneously, so that variables such as days of the week, time of day, and weather, etc., don't affect the data.
We have managed to do 5 sessions of research before lockdown and weren't originally intending to do more until after Christmas. So fortunately, as of yet, we haven't been negatively impacted by the pandemic.
By a digital lesson, the premise is for the lesson to be in a similar fashion to when we would do remote lessons. We'll do a starter as per usual, and then we ensure that each learner has access to a laptop.
There are separate action research classrooms for the digital groups. Here the resources can be found for the class, including an assigned Google Doc copy of the learner's workbook's content. This is editable and adapted to make online learning as accessible as possible. All content is the same as the rest of the cohort, it's just digital.
Learners have been shown how to access Google Docs maths questions via the latest feature that we have designed. The teacher will show where the work is located and how to access it. The teacher can then assist those who are struggling.
Our focus is on learners working with digital means independently as much as possible, but essentially learning the same content as those who are doing a non-digital lesson.
Topics such as coordinates, linear graphs, and transformation will be done in paper workbooks, although this is what we originally had planned anyway, but we had to adapt the resources and such because of remote learning. And what we did learn from our actual action research project is how to do this effectively.
Learners are monitored to check whether they are actually completing the work in general. This is one of our forms of assessment.
The teacher has access to learners' Google Docs and will be assessing throughout the lesson to check where work is being completed.
If learners wish, they can opt to not take part in the digital side of the lesson. These learners will be kept and the teacher can offer more direction. We asked all learners in an online initial learner survey on whether they wish to take part.
We try not to use the same group twice, so therefore we're not putting the learners at a disadvantage.
At the end of the lesson, learners take a learner survey via Google Forms. We also conduct small focus groups with willing learners to get more detailed feedback from learners completing both digital and non-digital lessons instead of one-to-ones on these project weeks.
The Google Docs and forms that learners used whilst taking part in the Digital Action Research Project are all shared with the maths team and therefore can be analysed whenever.
This feature will be especially useful when we go to compare feedbacks and results between terms.
The non-digital lesson will go ahead as normal. The only exception is at the end of the session, learners will take a survey. The survey will be different to those taken by the digital groups. Some learners from these groups will take part in a small focus group at the end of the lesson.
Here are 2 examples of what the assessments look like. We often use Equatio as well so that learners can use the right maths symbol or present the maths in the correct format.
And so that is a Google form. Here's what the results section will also look like, which I'm going to show you now. So below is an example of average overall scores of a learner's assessments from a recent week.
This is an example of frequently missed questions. It's good to quickly see where learners are struggling at a glance.
Below is an example of answered questions from all the answers provided. This is great for finding common mistakes and patterns that may be present.
Our next example is of a class's responses all on one spreadsheet to quickly assess and compare.
So what has gone well? So we found many aspects of the project very positive, but we're particularly proud of two areas.
Firstly, the feedback we have received from our learners has been extremely detailed, well balanced and incredibly useful. We'll admit that we weren't particularly convinced that we would get much honest feedback from some of our demographic of learners, but we were surprised. Our engaged and motivated learners were always going to support the project, but many of our learners dislike maths lessons, and so we thought they would offer little to no feedback.
We've completed surveys before, from asking about how learners would prefer their lesson structure to happen, to asking if learners would want to do revision classes. But as a department, we've never tried really asking for their opinions on resources or delivery. What we have received is both humbled and inspired.
Some of the most useful and subjectively most important feedback has come from learners who do not participate much in lessons, but due to the project, now we know why. From the feedback we have so far implemented.
First thing is digital workbooks have been designed differently to what we did beforehand, so learners can edit their work in a more natural and simple method, including a dedicated space to demonstrate their working out.
We now teach the independent part of our lesson in small sessions rather than in one large session. We have tried to be as flexible with this as possible.
And the third thing, learners generally feel that their technical skills are improving because they're taking part in the action research. So when we've asked that in a survey, 78% have said yes.
Following on from what I've previously mentioned, the other part that we're proudest of is the increasing ability of technical skills, not just with our learners, but also with the staff, so with the maths team. This is in regards to digital resource making.
This upskilling couldn't have come at a better time. Due to another national lockdown, our teaching is now fully remote until January. The project has involved the learners using digital resources, which in turn means the teaching team has to also use more in order to create them. Whilst our teaching team are open to new ideas, some of the staff haven't always been confident within their own digital skills.
Due to having to use the same programs that the learners are using in order to teach the specification, the team have adopted and adapted. We are now in discussion with other colleges about sharing this best practice.
The feedback we've received from learners has not only helped us with the project, but also to prepare our remote learning package as well. Thus, our team now know the best way to make resources to suit online learning and delivery. Assessments via Google Forms, using Jamboards via iPads, and lastly, opening their teaching practice to try new things. This will ensure that we improve our best practice and lead the team to becoming stronger, with the learners rightly benefiting from that.
If we hadn't had this valuable feedback from the learners, this would not have happened, and definitely not been as seamless and successful as it has been.
I'm going to show you some feedback, survey results, and some of our data that we've collected now. So here is some of the survey results from the learners. The next two questions were asked at the start of a lesson. So question 1.
Learners generally scored high with a mean average of 84%.
And for question 2, learners generally scored high with a mean average of 3.4 out of 5, or 68%.
Question 3, 28.6% of learners felt that they worked better digitally.
Judging from how, and then for question 4, 42.9% said yes. So that was for, would you ever use technology to learn maths at home, which we're quite happy to read.
Judging from how the learners answered the previous questions, it seems that either the learners were actually less able than they first thought, or it was how we design the content or resources that has made the learners feel otherwise.
We'll keep analysing that moving ahead. And from the same group, we've got some quotes here. So that's when we very first started to do our digital learning package. Got some more complimentary quotes. So we use Chromebooks at the college as our main sort of laptops that learners would use. So we took that all on board and we adapted our resources for the better.
Here are some visual examples of the work and resources we've been making.
This is a method of providing feedback for our learners. Another method here as well, show where I've edited the question there. And then once again, giving feedback for a question there. Cool, so from now we're going to look at feedback from a different class. And whilst the previous week, the sort of stuff we just showed you just before was looking at a digital aspect of the action research project, this was looking at more the independent learning here. Nice data to read there.
Almost overwhelmingly, this group, particularly as have most, like being left alone to work at their own pace through the work. Upon looking at whether it was successful in terms of assessment in the lesson, we had mixed results.
A learner who had given a working grade of 4 by the college completed very little work. He scored 22% on the topics of the lesson compared to an average of 63% that he'd scored on other weeks. However, others in the class did score higher than the average. That included 2 learners, but most stayed about the same.
Showing that, at least for this group and week, independent learning was enjoyed and desired in the future. It showed little change in their assessment score.
So it's really almost done now, just the outcomes now.
Lovely, going to ask you to breeze through those. Brilliant, thank you.
As a department, we're hopeful the following years positively develop for the following things. So learner independency, especially digital math skills. Streamline digital learning package that the college will provide, and engage our demographic of learner, socioeconomic backgrounds and prior ability both considered in equal measure. We've got the lovely team here. Put pictures to the images you guys might already have.
Fabulous. No, it's great to see the team. And thank you both.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Lovely. What I'm going to ask people to do is to also to jot down any questions. We can explore those at the end, but think of any common themes that you can see emerging, because, you know, we already said maths and digital, but there Jo and Sophie have thrown up some more themes about engagement and different socio-economic groups, and some really surprising, lovely findings about learners who didn't imagine they would be engaged. So if you've got a question for them at the end, or anything, any comments you've got on the themes that are emerging, let us know. But Gail, I think we need to move swiftly on, don't we? With our second volunteers, who is it going to be? Adam, you were there first. I saw that hand go straight up. Adam Clark, the Sheffield College.
Right, let me get...
The floor is yours. Yes, yes, take your time. Lovely.
Sorry,
Nice to see some. If you're spotting any common themes, then Gail's quite right. Or you've got any questions, let's fully utilise chat while Adam is getting his presentation ready for us. So if you've got any questions that you'd like to ask, or if you're thinking, oh, that intersects nicely with our project, that's interesting for me, then please pop some comments after a presentation, or even during as it goes along. Let's be using that chat actively. Welcome, Adam, whenever you're ready.
Okay. Right, okay, so what I can say at the moment is that I can probably paraphrase everything we've just heard over the last 12 minutes or so, which is fine, so yeah, so through, sorry, there we go. So what we've been looking at is investigating flipped learning approach to engaging, supporting and building confidence in GCSE maths with our retake learners. Fortunately, when we started looking at what we were going to go for with the action research was before lockdown, and now it completely and utterly fits in with our remote learning methodology that we're using in the college. So that was very fortunate in one way. Just to introduce myself, I'm Adam. I'm the curriculum team leader for GCSE maths, which means that I'm kind of supporting a little bit below the level of Neil, who is unfortunately not able to be here today. He's the head of academy for all maths across the college. We're also joined by Eleanor, who is a lecturer in GCSE maths and I think some functional skills. And Eleanor will jump in if I say anything that's completely wrong, hopefully. Right, okay, so yes, so the idea of flipped learning, we obviously, we've gone to remote learning. What we're going to look at now is the background of why we went into the method of teaching that we've gone for, how we've been using Google Forms as well. I think that's going to be a common thread through a lot of establishments. Reducing workload, but also increasing the value of the data that we're getting through them, and share some of the lessons that we've learned so far. Certainly there's been a lot of reflection on how we can change things, and certainly what we're looking at for the new year. And next steps, and gathering some feedback from yourselves. And, as I say, I think we're going to have a lot of crossover in how we are, how we're running things. And, it will be really, really interesting to see what has worked elsewhere, what hasn't, particularly when we're kind of rethinking our approach. Okay. So the background. There is a whole college strategy. Sheffield College is a very, very large college with sites that are not particularly good at social distancing. So the college is looking at limiting student attendance, which means we teach adult students and they've come in on a bubble system. So the class of 20 is split in half and we see those on alternate weeks. But because of the need for kind of the social distancing, all of our 16 to 19 vocational students were going to be taught online and online only. So the attendance was prioritised for practical subjects. We have brickwork, we have catering, and so obviously I think we've gone for 30% attendance on site. So obviously they went in first and GCSE was right at the bottom of the pile. The college has gone in and bought the Google Enterprise suite, which I think is probably going to be fairly common across the sector. And we have in the past, we've had an issue where we've had several systems running side by side. And obviously, with the situation that we're in and probably ongoing, a decision has been made at the top level that we're going to go with Google and everybody is going to be using Google. We previously, we had a lot of students who hadn't achieved a grade 3, and obviously for the conditions of funding, grade 3 students have to sit GCSE. We did use functional skills with those students who'd got grade 1s or grade 2s. This year, we've gone for an all-in GCSE across the whole cohort. The thinking behind it is that we get students who stay with us for 3 or 4 years. If they go into functional skills and then they come to GCSE 3 or 4 years after they last saw the content, they're basically falling off a cliff edge. So it's about building up the students, and what they'll be seeing in GCSE will completely reflect what they've seen in school. Okay, so in terms of as an academy within the college, we've looked at rewriting our scheme of work for a top 15 methodology, which I don't know if you've heard of, but we have our new assistant principal for the area, came from a college where there had been some analysis on the GCSE exams since 2017, and there are 15 topics that account for 85% of the marks. So when we're concentrating on grade 4 for students, we've made the scheme of work so it absolutely fits with this top 15 and the repetition of the topics that we think are the most don't want to say important, but the ones that are going to offer the most marks when it comes to the exam. Okay, interleaving as well. You know, we have to view the course as a revision course, because realistically we've got 20 to 25 lessons that we're going to see the students for. We were always timetabled, because we have to timetable against vocational courses, for 1 3-hour lesson a week, which in previous years, you know, for GCSE, that is just far too much to be gaining from that 1 lesson a week. We bought into Hegarty Maths, which again I think is probably fairly common across the board. The online platform, which we think is excellent, and we kind of started with it last year. And the plan, again, prior to lockdown and remote learning, was that we wanted to utilise Hegarty Maths more in the regular day-to-day weekly work and what we were doing within sessions. And obviously, you know, we need to incorporate the cross-college use of Google Classroom and the enterprise. So we really did this year start from scratch in terms of how we were putting the scheme of work together and how we would work through that this year. One of the other things that has that's come from the approach of every student sitting GCSE now is that we used to have tutors in vocational areas who would teach the functional skills and had no previous knowledge, experience of working teaching at GCSE. So what we've done as an approach is supporting those tutors who maybe, you know, are a little bit more anxious about the teaching. Okay. I'll not stop for questions. I think we have in those at the end, don't we, Lynn?
Yes, thanks, Adam, if we could.
Okay, yeah. So the session delivery, as I say, we are timetabled for 1 3-hour lesson a week. What we're doing is going digitally. We've got a department website, which if you want to have a look at, then the link is down there. We'll share that afterwards. But obviously also the work that we're setting is through a Google Classroom. We have a common Google Classroom that everybody has, a master that everybody's taken a copy of, so that in terms of this weekly work, all the students are seeing the same thing. Okay, so we've got that consistency going. The session structure. Each week we release an introductory video. So that is one of the members of the department kind of explaining what the topic is, the focus is going to be on for the week, why it's important, how it fits into exam questions, how it fits into the top 15. At the same time, we release a diagnostic assessment, which is a Google form, and it asks 10 questions right at the very start, essential skills, and that provides us with the students with their starting point for their learning over the week. I'll describe that a bit more on the next slide. Then we've also put in a starter, so as you would do in a face-to-face lesson, so it's something that doesn't relate to the week's topic. It's where we can put that interleaving in, so we can revisit topics from before, but also kind of introduce topics that we're going to see in the following week or so on. There's an activity as well, and the activity is, obviously we've gone away from worksheets. It should be something a bit more interesting that relates to the week's work. So it's we're looking at kind of applying what we've been looking at for the week. And then that leads to an online workshop, which is a Google Meet, and they take place within the 3-hour timetabled lesson that students have got on their timetable, but we see them for 30 or 40 minutes. So what we've got here, and I feel is kind of a bit of a silver lining to this approach, is that the students have got 6 days to complete everything up to the workshop. Okay, so rather than one lump of 3 hours where you might get half an hour work before break and half an hour afterwards and 2 hours completely wasted time, you know, we know that little and often is the way to learn, and we can say, right, 20 minutes one day, 20 minutes the next day. And yeah, so we get up to that workshop, and at that point we've got an idea of where the students are at and what we need to focus on when it comes to the actual workshop session.
If I can give you a 30-second warning, please, Adam.
Oh, 30 seconds, oh dear. Right, okay, and then that follows up with a mini exam, and the idea is assessing the progress over the week. We're not going to get through this. The diagnostic assessment is put through on a Google Classroom, 10 questions, increasing up to kind of grade 6 standard. We use it as a baseline measure for the week. In Google Forms means it's self-marking. Students get immediate feedback and targets the next steps. So when they go into the answers, we've got links to the appropriate Hegarty lessons for students so they can self-lead, but by being directed by us. It's an efficient way of us collecting data and storing should we need to come back to it. Obviously, a lot of this, we've got an eye on the potential for CAGs again this year. So we're collecting regular data on a weekly basis. What's going well? Staff within the department develop the materials, so we've all got good familiarity. There is 15 of us within the academy, and then a further 16 who go into the vocational areas that are teaching. Standardized structure, students know what to expect. It's the same each week, and you can kind of, you know, they know what to expect, and we can, it's not kind of revisiting, starting new things each week. The diagnostic obviously gives us lots of understanding of the student starting points, and the scaffolding through Hegarty is working really well for a lot of students. Okay,
fabulous.
Hegarty.
Oh, lovely. We'll make those presentations available. I have to stop everyone at 11 minutes or I will get into terrible trouble. We will be sharing all of the slides and there'll be a chance to reflect on it later. But thank you. If you've got questions for Adam or if you've got comments, please pop them in chat. Anything about the themes that are emerging. And at this point, I'll ask you to stop sharing, Adam, and I'm going to look for our next volunteer. We're down to 2. Who's going next? Oh, yeah. Oh, you see, I saw Carl's hand before Aga's, which wasn't fair, but there you go.
Well, that's fine because Aga's the one who's going to share the screen.
There we go. I wanted a good, clean tussle between the 2 of you. Aga, away you go. Beautifully aided by Carl from College of Western Anglia. Go for it.
Can everyone see that?
We can. Thank you. All yours.
Okay, brilliant. So College of West Anglia, both me and Carl work together. I'm actually looking after maths department in total, and then Carl is one of the maths tutors. And we've been, when we first applied for OTLA, we have just been told we are going into online delivery. So we're going 100% online, and it was completely new. And when I say online, it's live sessions. So students are still following their timetable, and in their specific slots, they have to zoom in basically. So they have to attend maths lesson online. So our initial idea about OTLA was that we're going to go with, you know, how do we approach online delivery? What we're going to do with it? How are we going to, you know, what's the best method? So we wanted to research into that. But while we have started doing it, we have found out that actually, although attendance at first was horrendous, actually getting students into the online classroom is not the difficulty. The engagement and tracking of progression is the part we need to focus on. So this is where kind of our research went into. So we kind of moving into engagement and tracking progress. So I'll just quickly take you through a bit of our background and then our teaching methods and digital tools we're using, and then what we found so far doing the research. So our background, so obviously College of West Anglia, we've got 5 campuses that we as a maths team cater for. We've got around 450 GCSE research learners and around 800 functional skills. That's across entry level all the way up to level 2. We also deliver A-level maths, and we've started level 3 core maths this year. These are quite small cohorts. We're hoping we can develop level 3 core further up next year. It's our first year this year, so bear with us. And our aims were to have consistent delivery and then obviously improved results. So a little bit about our teaching methods. So Adam, who was just talking, is working with Trevor. He used to be our boss. So we have also used Top 15 for our GCSE resits. And when I first joined college, Trevor was introducing 5R approach. I don't know how many of you have heard about that. This is Julius Smith baby. So when it was first introduced, we were kind of trying it out. And then when I took over, we adapted the 5R approach. So for those of you that don't know what it is, it's basically a structure for the lesson where you've got a routine, recall, revise, repeat, and exam ready. And we follow that. We've actually planned our resources prior, we started planning them prior to lockdown, and then we had to adapt it for online provision. We've also took part in Centre for Excellence last year in Mastery Approach, which made us, want to use that approach in our delivery, whether online or face-to-face. So we are using a lot of mastery stuff and variation theory. Craig Barton is our really good friend right now, and we love his resources. We've introduced exam pair problems in our lessons. So now our lesson resources have got example of how to tackle the question, and then right next to it, it will have a question for learners to have a go at, and then we will use variation theory along the side, because we've realized that our learners cannot link the topics. So a lot of our lessons will now involve, basic stuff like addition and subtraction, but alongside it, we will also involve algebra. So they see there are links between the two, and then actually the methods are exactly the same. And then exam ready questions is quite a big part of the lessons, because although majority of them can there and then understand the method and apply the method, when it comes to exam question and what the exam question is asking them to do, they can't do that. And then obviously we had to adapt them for online sessions. So we will talk about it a little bit later on as well. But what we found so far is that 1.5, because our delivery method is that we see students for 3 hours, for GCSE for 3 hours a week, and then that's 2 1.5 hour slots a week. And we found out that 1.5 hours online is completely different than 1.5 hours on site. So face to face, we get more teaching time basically than online. Start of this year, we've introduced survey to capture students' attitude to maths. So basically, we just wanted to know, for them to tell us what it is about maths they dislike, what it is that dismotivates them, what it is that, makes them disengaged, and then how can we help to make sure that they have got successful year with maths. We accounted for some digital poverty, but then we didn't account for all of it. It's interesting to have found out after a couple of weeks of teaching that majority of students haven't got access to a computer, haven't got access to internet, haven't got access to they're using data on the bus to zoom in for the lessons. It was just very interesting. So we had to put a lot of things in place for them to be able to access lessons. So such as, colleges purchased headphones and cameras for learners to use in our LRC. And then Carl's going to talk a little bit more about Microsoft Forms and Pictures later on when we talk about what we found out so far. So over to you, Carl.
Okay. I think this one was your slide, but okay. So this was our feedback that we got in the original survey, so that we could see what our learners said. A lot of them said that they need to do a lot of work at both college and at home, which is useful to know. It's good to know that they sit there and think, yes, I need to do lots of work. It's quite reassuring, really, to know that. There's also quite a lot of them said that they find maths useful in their everyday life as well. Like that's on the second one that we've got there. Nice to see that they think all of those sorts of things. Can we go next slide, Aga? And this was the words that we found that they enjoyed most when we did that original survey. So it's very interesting that even in our recent learners, the words solving and learning and really enjoy are the ones that appear most. And that's honestly, yeah, really reassuring. If I can go to the next slide again. The main focus of what I've looked at is identifying their misconceptions digitally, which I've got to admit sort of emerged from how I started off with. I wanted to just see how they were doing at different topics. So I opened up Microsoft Forms, I used the math function in it, and just typed a bunch of questions into it, which I mainly acquired off of diagnosticquestions.com. I made sure they were appropriate question levels, of course, because there's all sorts on there. The interesting thing then became that their misconceptions really started to crop up. I know that diagnostic questions are meant to pick up misconceptions, but it's how many there were and what we ended up with. The interesting thing being that there are two types of misconceptions that literature mentions. I've got this reference here. Basically, there's direct ones which you can just look at. So you look at a problem like addition, and anything goes wrong there, it's a direct thing you can do. You can just add two numbers together, and if there's anything happening there, you've got a direct misconception. It's because something's just not quite gone right when you add. There's alternatively this emergent one, which is like misinterpreting an emergent process as a kind of common sense direct process. So the one I'm going to use here in an example is that they've looked at an addition of fractions problem, and they just look at the numbers at the top, they look at the numbers at the bottom, they just add the denominators, add the numerators, and obviously that doesn't add two fractions together. So I think I'm spotting quite a few of those now that I've known what to look for. Another example I'd give would be the common one of when you've got a group frequency table and they just add all the frequencies together and divide by, say, 5 columns. Next slide. So these are results that I got from my topic-specific initial assessments. So I've been giving my groups these little Microsoft Forms quizzes that take about 5-10 minutes to do. They just race straight through them. They click a bunch of answers that are all multiple choice, and I get results really quickly. And I've actually had good feedback from them saying they enjoyed it, which is nice. So I've got this direct misconception on the left. They've pretty much, generally speaking, when I've asked them how they got that result, they just look at the question, they look at the ratio, it's 14 to 16, they simplify that down to 7/8, done. That's the top option. That must be the answer. Alternatively, as you can see there, we've got the emergent version with the fraction where, yes, the most popular correct answer is the right one, but there's a lot of wrong ones as well.
I'm going to give you the 30-second warning as well. I have to be very strict so that you get a break. Yes,
cool.
It
Next
flies.
Slide, please. Okay, so the result was that, generally speaking, the proportion asked that went for the wrong answer in the direct misconception went down quite nicely, whereas the emergent one, as we can see there, it's still very much a mixed bag of what they got. Next slide again then, probably. And I also plotted how confident they were, because I asked them how confident they were at topics versus what their scores were. As we see, there is a rough but only vague correlation between their confidence and their actual ability. I think I said about most of those things. And yeah, looking to the future, I'm looking at using the rule style variation theory so that there's a bit more prompts to everybody. So they've got a choice, rather, because I seem not very keen on actually providing an answer straight away. Whereas if they've got a bunch of options, they seem a lot more keen to do it. So that's an additional way of getting answers.
Yeah, and then I've interviewed some of the students that Carl's doing that research with, and in general, they seem to be very positive. They seem to understand why we are online and, you know, what the issues are, and then that we as a team and they're as students still learning about digital delivery. The only thing they have said was that they don't really like breakout rooms because there's no support from teacher in there. Obviously, you can't be in 2 places at once. And then that they would like to see some more interactivity in lessons, which obviously we're going to have to work on as a team.
Fabulous, thank you. As I say, we will share presentations because I'm aware that I'm having to stop people at the 10 minutes that we awarded you, and I'm being really, really strict. So any questions, please pop them in chat. So last but not least, because I've got to get you done by just about 25 past, so you get about 5 minutes break. Lee, you're up. So take a minute to load your slides while we look at your wonderful Fibonacci background, which I absolutely adore. Lovely. So Lee and Karen joining us from Bishop Burton and Rysholme. Thank you so much to Arga and Carl, and thank you for dashing through. Yeah, we love your background. Fabulous. We're just seeing you starting to screen share, raising confidence in math through technology. You're away. We can see that. Thank you.
Okay, so we focused on functional skills students, but what we wanted to do was bring it together with the apprenticeships. So that's what Karen does. Karen looks after apprentices. I look after GCSE functional skills maths. So the platform we used was Century. It appears to be an all singing, all dancing platform. You can create reports on it. There's a teacher dashboard. You can set individual assignments. There isn't a diagnostic tool, which an initial assessment tool, which is something that we were hoping to have. So our positives using this platform, Karen has some apprenticeships and mostly adults. I'm going to let Karen talk to you about some of hers that have already passed.
The positives we've had, obviously they're not coming into college because employers generally aren't letting them come into college because of COVID. So the positives we've had, been able to set online work. The negatives, it's surprising how many of the adult learners I've got don't have computers in any way. And the college insisted on buying this system that won't work on a mobile phone. So the negative is obviously they don't have access to online, so everything we do is having to be paper-based and photographs taken on phones and marked that way. So the system is there, it's just they don't have access to it. And the college won't allow the apprentices to take a laptop home, whereas the GCSE students are allowed it. So it's not really fair on, I don't feel it's fair on the apprentices, that the college are treating them slightly different. Although the feedback from the college is they're working, so they should be able to buy their own equipment. But they're not going to. So yeah, where do we go with that? I don't know what anybody else is having with learners not having laptops at home.
Yeah, we do. It is a positive for the functional skills students. They do have access to college laptops to take home, albeit some of they're not the best equipment. The engagement from my side has been great because it's been scheduled into the curriculum. So they do have an hour a week scheduled for Century. So as you can see from the little picture, there's lots of engagement. One of our case studies, this is a student of mine that couldn't read or write when he came to me last year, and he was with me for functional English and maths, and he was below entry level 1, and this is his engagement basically on Century. It's amazing. He loved it, absolutely loved it. But he also had the support at home. And this is a young man who's 21, and he's got through his entry level 2. So he's passed his entry level 2 exam now. We're third in our group of colleges for engagement on Century. That has been partly due to almost all the departments at Bishop go into self-isolation. So most of the students were given Century as a learning tool to use at home. The difficulties we've had is access to the funding that's available. We did lose, Karen's worked so hard at getting the apprentices engaged, and they did all their diagnostics, they bought into it, they finally bought into it, and then an upload to Century caused the loss of all the apprenticeship students from the database. So we did lose all their data, which then had a negative impact on their engagement. And our next steps, Karen's developed a survey. We plan on issuing that just to see how they're getting on. Our exam results, we've got a couple of exams coming up in the new year, and then to collate the data and to see just how successful this is on their learning. We're also looking at introducing some video lessons that are recorded so they can use them, they can go back to them as many times as they want. Karen actually doesn't know about this. This is a surprise to her. I've started making some based on the topics we've recently covered in class, just in case we've got self-isolating students. We don't want them missing out. And that is us, unless Karen's got anything else to add.
No, I think we covered it all.